The crescent moon hung low over the village, casting its pale, silvery light across a landscape once steeped in ancient magic. This village, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, had been a place of mystery for generations. Its people, long ago, had known the ways to protect themselves from the things that lurked in the shadows. But over time, progress marched on, and with it, the old ways were forgotten. The cobbled streets, now cracked and worn, wound between houses that had once been cottages of old stone and wood, protected by charms and sigils carved into door frames. But as the world changed, the villagers replaced their rustic homes with modern, efficient buildings. New materials, new ideas, and new ways of thinking began to dominate. The people no longer believed in the spirits and creatures that were once said to stalk the night. There had once been a time when every household knew to place a sprig of rosemary on their windowsills and to hang an iron horseshoe above their doors. Rose bushes, planted not just for their beauty but for their ability to ward off evil, had once lined every path. Now, those bushes grew wild or had been replaced by ornamental hedges, their purpose forgotten. In the center of the village stood an old church, its steeple still pointing to the heavens. Its doors rarely opened these days, and when they did, it was only for weddings or funerals. The once thriving congregation had dwindled, and the village's spiritual life had withered with it. The cross atop the steeple cast a long shadow over the streets, but its power, once strong enough to protect the village, had faded like an old memory. Few in the village remembered the tales of the creature, a thing of nightmares that had once prowled these lands, kept at bay only by the strength of faith and tradition. One such person was old Mrs. Kinsley, a woman well into her 80s, who still lived in a small cottage at the edge of the village. She was the last of the old families, the only one who remembered the old ways. She tended to her rose garden every day, trimming and pruning, whispering prayers that no one else bothered to recite anymore. Her neighbors thought of her as a relic, an odd old woman who clung to superstitions. The younger families in the village would wave politely as they passed her house, but they never stopped to talk for long. They didn't want to hear her warnings or listen to her stories about the creatures that lived in the woods or the dangers that came when the moon was high and the fog was thick. But Mrs. Kinsley knew. She had seen the signs, the moon hanging lower than usual, the fog creeping in earlier each evening, and the cold that seemed to settle in even when the sun was still shining. She felt it in her bones. Something was coming. Something old, something dark. And she feared the village would not be ready. Long before the village forgot its history, before its streets were paved and its buildings modernized, there was a man named Nicholas. Nicholas had been a kind man, well liked by the villagers, always smiling and lending a helping hand. He had a wife and child, and he lived in a small cottage at the edge of the woods. But tragedy struck his family when a terrible illness swept through the village, claiming the lives of his wife and child within days. Devastated by grief, Nicholas became a shadow of the man he once was. He wandered the village aimlessly, no longer able to find joy in the simple things that had once filled his heart. He stopped tending his garden, stopped visiting his friends, and began spending more and more time alone in the woods. It was during one of these lonely wanderings that Nicholas encountered something ancient, a creature, neither fully alive nor dead, that lurked in the deepest, darkest part of the forest. It spoke to him, whispering promises of reunion with his lost family. All it asked in return was his soul. Desperate and blinded by sorrow, Nicholas made the pact. He gave his soul willingly, not knowing that he was not trading his life for his family's return, but for an eternity of torment. The creature twisted him, reshaping his body and soul into something unrecognizable. His skin grew pale and cold as stone, his once kind eyes turned into hollow, flame-like embers, and his heart, once filled with love, was consumed by hatred and hunger. He became the first of the village's nightmares, a creature that stalked the night, feeding on the living, driven by an insatiable thirst for the blood of the innocent. For years, the villagers fought against him, using the old ways to protect themselves. But as time passed and the village's faith and traditions faded, Nicholas, now fully a creature of the dark, began to stir again, his hunger reawakened. In the present day, the village was home to a young family, a mother, a father, and their 7-year-old son, Michael. They lived in a small house at the end of the street, a house much like the others, with blue vinyl siding and a neatly kept lawn. Red roses lined the porch, but their significance had long been forgotten. They were simply decorations now, not the protective barrier they had once been. Michael had always been a sensitive child. He was prone to vivid dreams, some of which left him trembling and crying out in the middle of the night. His parents, Sarah and David, tried their best to comfort him, assuring him that monsters weren't real and that there was nothing to be afraid of. But as the nights grew colder and the fog rolled in earlier and earlier, Michael's nightmares became more frequent and his fear more palpable. One night, after a particularly bad dream, Michael ran into his parents' room, tears streaming down his face. He clutched at his mother, trembling as he told her about the terrible creature he had seen in his dreams, a pale figure with glowing eyes and sharp teeth, floating above his bed. Sarah held him close, whispering soothing words. David sat up, rubbing his eyes, and pulled Michael onto his lap. "It's just a dream, buddy," he said, trying to smile through his exhaustion. "There are no monsters, okay? They're not real, and they can't hurt you." Michael nodded, wiping his eyes, but deep down, he wasn't so sure. The dreams felt real, too real, and the fear lingered even when he was awake. His parents didn't understand. They couldn't see what he saw. On a cold autumn night, when the moon hung low and the fog crept in early, the creature stirred from its slumber. It had been years since it had last fed, but now the village was vulnerable again. The old protections were gone, and the faith that had once kept it at bay had withered. The time had come to feed. As the village slept, the creature drifted through the streets, a silent specter moving through the fog. Its talon-like nails hovered just above the ground, and its glowing eyes scanned the houses, searching for prey. It passed by homes without stopping, its gaze fixed on one house in particular, the house at the end of the street, where a small child slept fitfully in his bed. The creature paused as it passed by the old church, its movement slowing as if weighed down by an invisible force. The shadow of the cross stretched across the street, and for a moment, the creature faltered. But the church's power was weak now, its influence diminished by the village's loss of faith. The creature pushed through the resistance and continued on its path, its hunger growing with each passing moment. It reached the house, slipping through the door as easily as smoke through a crack. Inside, the air was thick with the warmth of sleep, but the creature brought with it a chill that seeped into every corner of the home. It moved silently up the stairs, gliding past the master bedroom where Sarah and David slept soundly, unaware of the danger. Michael lay in his bed, tossing and turning as his dreams turned dark again. In his dream, he saw the creature, the same one from all his nightmares, this time closer than ever before. Its pale face and burning eyes stared at him through the fog, and it whispered his name. Michael bolted upright in bed, his heart racing. But when he opened his eyes, he wasn't dreaming anymore. The creature was there, standing in the doorway of his room. Its glowing eyes locked onto him, and a cold, creeping dread washed over him. Shadows in the room stretched unnaturally, curling toward him like dark tendrils. He couldn't move, couldn't scream. The creature moved closer, its mouth twisting into a cruel smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Michael squeezed his eyes shut, repeating his father's words over and over again in his head. Monsters are real. Monsters are real. But no matter how many times he said it, he couldn't make himself believe it. His father had been wrong. The monster was real, and it was coming for him. As the creature loomed over the bed, reaching out with its clawed hands, Michael did the only thing he could think of. He pulled the covers over his head, hiding beneath the blanket. The creature's cold breath was so close now, the stench of decay filling the room. But then, something incredible happened. As Michael curled up beneath his covers, the air in the room shifted. A warmth spread from where the blanket touched his skin, and a light, bright and pure, began to glow from beneath the fabric. The creature recoiled, hissing in fury as the light grew stronger, burning its skin with an intensity it hadn't felt in centuries. Blinded and writhing in agony, the creature thrust.